In today's video, we're going to be talking about Giratina V-STAR. Now, one of my favorite decks, and one of the decks that we've been testing for the World Championships, is Giratina V-STAR. I know I've had success winning a cup and coming in top 8 in an even bigger cup out in Canada, as well as the rest of the Shuffle Squad having success in our testing. We're going to break down the entirety of the list and where we went from and where we came to with all of the cards and how they fit into the meta. You're going to want to stick around for the rest of this video here. Before we do that, we're going to have a quick word from our sponsors.
Be sure to check out all of the sponsors of the Shuffle Squad, whether you're looking for graded cards, you're looking for singles, sealed, we have all affiliate codes with all of our great sponsors, so be sure to check them out in the description below. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Now again, talking about the deck, I've had success with using it, and I know that others in the Shuffle Squad have also had success, so maybe this video will help you out in discovering some different ways or different plays within the deck that you can use yourself when you're going to a League Cup or a League Challenge. I even think this deck can perform into the future after Obsidian Flames has been fully released and legal for standard play. This could be a play for the regionals coming up in Pittsburgh in September as well if it continues to see success in our testing. Alright, so starting off with this list here, you'll see that there are just a standard 3-3 line of the Giratina V-STAR, which I really feel is fine. I know a lot of people were adding a 4th Giratina V in maybe some early lists or back in the Lost Origin format just so you could find your Giratina V pretty easy, but we found that obviously having the Comfey in there as your primary starter when you're starting this deck is really where you want to be. Now, this is again the first iteration of how we came up with a deck list, and I know that Zach had also posted a list that was pretty similar to this too, with some changes, and we'll talk about that here later on in the video. But this is really where I went with first with the list, having the 2 Sableye, which is really necessary as your cleanup Pokemon. You never really want to go play into your Sableye early. It's really just if you smack 280, don't knock something out, then you can clean it up with Sableye later on in the game. Now, we only have one Cramorant in here. I do see some lists, even over in Japan, running a second Cramorant, and I really just find that Cramorant is a niche Pokemon, and it's nice for those early knockouts because if you're able to just play into a Lost Zone box, a standard Lost Zone box, whether it's Kyogre or if it's just Turbo Lost Zone box, just smacking with a Cramorant early on, taking out maybe a couple single prizers is really just what's going to set you apart from your opponent. Now let's talk about the supporters here. The supporter line, I really went heavier on the disruption aspect. So we do play the 2 Ionos in this deck and the 1 Roxanne. I've seen it flipped where there are 2 Roxannes and 1 Iono, which I find that it's good merit, but I think that the combination with the 3 path to the peak here is really how I wanted to play into this deck, because so many times you'll find that your opponents can lose footing with that early Iono even after they've taken a prize or 2 here. Again, if you're playing up against the Lost Zone box deck and you're getting knocked out by your opponent's Cramorant, you can just Iono and Path, and then their Greninja is completely shut off. Now, the same thing holds true when you're playing into a Chen-Pao deck. If you Iono and Path and they really don't have energy on a 4-card hand possibly, then that can just ruin their game state. You can completely obliterate them. So that's why the 2 Ionos are in here. I do see that the 2 bosses orders is pretty standard in most decks, so we won't really go into why you play 2 bosses orders because you really just need to find those. I've even lost zoned a bosses order and still be fine because inevitably your opponent has to put up a 2 prize attacker where you can knock that out with Giratina in most cases. I know Dragonite's probably pretty bad for putting down as the Lost Zone box player, as well as the Raikou, because again that just gets knocked out and doesn't KO your Giratina V-STAR. Now, I did go heavy on the search because what I went into this list thinking is that I wanted more consistency than anything else. Because we are using those disruption supporters, I wanted to have more consistency with the Nest Ball. I want to find what I need in the first couple of turns, and if I can't get there with Battle VIP or I don't find it with Battle VIP, then I want to be able to find it with Nest Ball. Now, I have seen people swap the 4th Nest Ball here with the Hisuian Heavy Ball, so you can use that to check your prizes. Maybe you don't have your Giratina, maybe you don't have your Radiant Greninja. All of those are really great other Pokemon. Your optimal bench with a list like this is to have 2 Comfeys on board, maybe a Manaphy, depending on what you're playing in, 2 Giratinas, and then your Greninja as a draw engine in case your path does get bumped. If somebody's trying to Iono you and bump your path, then you want that Greninja down. Now, Greninja is also a little scary here because you can use your Shuriken and just knock out 2 Pokemon with 90 HP or less, which again is going to set you above and beyond your opponent. Now let's look at the Switch cards in here. Now, we do only run 5 Switch items in this deck list here, and at first I think that the 5 Switch items is fine. I was huge on not playing 2 ropes. I think the second rope can really just stop you in your tracks, especially if you're down a boss already. Maybe a boss is in the loss zone. If you're putting something up from your opponent's bench that they don't care if they lose, I think rope is really bad. That's where I approve of Switch, and Switch also gives you another out if you can't use Switch Cart on your damaged Giratina V-Star because it's an evolved Pokemon. So where I use Switch here more than Escape Rope, that's why I wanted to go. I even felt it necessary to maybe even go to 2 Switch, but you do have those niche situations where somebody's protecting something on their bench and they only have that Pokemon on the bench and an active Pokemon. Say you're playing into a Gardevoir matchup where they have Mew in the active spot and maybe they whiffed a little bit and only have 1 Ralts on their bench. You want to use that Escape Rope there just to bring it up and maybe knock it out with a Cramorant. That way they struggle a little bit the following turn. I will say this, with the 3 paths to the peak, you definitely want to hold your paths from being put down early on in the game when you're playing up against a Gardevoir EX deck because they have so many outs to your stadiums. When you're going into a matchup like Gardevoir, you know that they're going to have at least 2, if not 3 stadiums, and some lists are even playing 2 workers, so you want to make sure that they're using those resources before you're putting down the path to the peak. We're going to talk about the energy count here. Now, 4 energy for the Psychic is where we sat on this list. That's pretty common. I have seen some lists, which I shake my head at, going down to 3 Psychic, but 4 Psychic is good not only for your Giratina, but also your late game Sableye. You want to be able to play that. Now, I know that Spiritomb is in here as a tech, but we won't go back there just yet. Let's stick on the energy. We have 3 grass energy, and 3 grass energy felt fine. Sometimes I really had to check my prizes to make sure all 3 grass were in deck, and it's scary because sometimes you do have to lost zone a energy card and maybe it's that grass. So as long as you have at least 2 in the deck, you should be just fine. You just have to make sure that when you're using Giratina's main attack to do the 280, you aren't lost zoning them too frequently. Otherwise, inevitably you're going to run out of energy cards. So the 3 of the grass energy was also fine. Now here's a little bit of copium. There are 3 water energy cards in this list, and water energy was good. Obviously, being able to shuriken with your Radiant Greninja is really good, but just having the water energy down, you can even smack something with a Manaphy if you need it, but those are really niche situations. So we're going to take a look at where the list kind of went after this. The 3 Jet also helped with the switching count, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but 3 Jet energy is really good in all lists. If you're going down to 2, it's going to really hurt unless you're upping your item count for switches, but 3 Jet is absolutely fine. I know Temple of Sinnoh is a card that either Gardevoir or maybe the opposing Giratina V-Stars are using, so Temple of Sinnoh is going to shut off your Jet energies, and I think that Just playing around it as a colorless energy is absolutely fine here too, because we still have the 5 switch outs that we can use in this deck, but I did find that I needed maybe 1 or 2 more switch cards in this list after playing with it for a while. Going back to the tech items that we have here, it's really just the Spiritomb in this list. That was the 60th card. I went into my meta knowing that there was some really great Mew players out there, and they could use that Genesect in a way and not be able to get around my Spiritomb and Path in play. And that's really what helped me. I knew that maybe there was a Lugia player or two, and you can stop their Lumineon from coming down. Maybe even the Chen Pao player, they can't play their Lumineon to find their Battle VIP Pass in the early game. Same thing goes for Rapid Strike decks. If they're just not able to use their Forest Seal Stone, maybe they have to go in for a Lumineon and find that. I found Spiritomb was a great tech. If those decks, primarily Mew and Lugia, are heavy in your meta, maybe you do want to play the Spiritomb, but we opted to take it out, and I'll show you where our list went after there. Alright, so here's the second version of the list. So this list was used by Zach Lesage over in Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, and he had won the largest cup that's been hosted so far in the season over there with this list. So what we want to take a look at, the Pokemon line is very similar to the prior list that we were just talking about, except for the Spiritomb is gone out of this list. Now Zach went in assuming that Mew is kind of bad in such a large scale tournament there, so you don't need Spiritomb as much. Maybe Lugia is on the downtick on that specific weekend, and it really worked out into his favor. We do see that the supporter line is exactly the same though, so we won't spend too much time there. Obviously having the 2 Ionos is great for disruption, and then that late game Roxanne. Again, paying attention to your supporter line is key in this deck when you are using it, because you want to make sure maybe I lost an Iono due to a flower selecting or a Colress's experiment, and maybe I only have the one, so you want to save that for mid-game, and then your Roxanne obviously for end-game to put your opponent in a really bad spot and have to recover that many cards. Having the path here is just so great. So Zach did also opt to keep all 3 path in this list here. And I think that path is really great. You want to talk about the matchups that path is good in. If you go into those Arc decks, anything playing Arceus, if you slam a path down super early, chances are they don't have a way to bump the path to the peak, so they can't Starbirth into the game. Specifically going into the Arc Tina matchup, which is pretty atrocious for the most part if you're playing as the Lost Giratina player, but having the 3rd path in here, just able to find it so often, and then also having your way of disrupting your opponent is really good, and that's what sets this deck above and beyond an Arc Tina deck. Going into Chen Pao, now the EX Pokemon can't use their abilities. Same thing with Gardevoir. If you're looking at all of these decks, even now that Palkia is starting to come out of the ranks, Path of the Peak is such a detrimental card here. And I will say this, that any Giratina deck that's not playing the 3rd Path of the Peak, you're probably doing it wrong. I just feel like in this meta that we're in, there's not a whole lot of special energy that's used aside from Mew and Lugia, and you don't necessarily need something like the Temple of Sinnoh. Yes, I do see the cases where you're playing an Arceus deck and you want to shut off their double turbo energy, but I really don't think that that's a problem here, especially if you're playing down Path to the Peak. I think just having that 3rd out again is really what makes this deck probably the best deck in format. So being able to utilize the stadiums and the supporter cards there are great, and I think that that's pretty solid for a line. Let's talk about the item cards. So still running the 4 Battle VIP and the Mirage Gate. That's standard in pretty much any list. And now we've moved down to 3 Nest Balls. So the 3rd Nest Ball was fine. We definitely didn't want to go to a 2 or 1 here in this list, keeping the consistency up, but no alternative to the 4th Nest Ball, which I think was fine. After testing and then cutting Spiritomb to not draw into it on your starting hand, I think that that's perfectly fine to go with 3 Nest Balls and then just something to keep in mind late game. You might want to hold a Nest Ball to find that Sableye later on in the game too. So thinking that now we're cutting that line down to 3 instead of 4, just having one in your back pocket, even if it's fodder inside the deck, you don't want to thin all of your Nest Balls super early. You do want to hold some in hand. Zach did opt to go for the 2 Escape Rope here, and I don't know if that helped or hurt him too much in the matchups that he did play, but just having the 5th switch out was really good here, not needing the 6th. So if we're looking at this list a little bit further, you know, that was a big change here, the super odds. Let's talk about the super odds because I did have super odds and I didn't go over that in my list here, but super odd is so key. You never want to lose a super odd unless you absolutely have to. Unless you have a game-winning piece and a super odd in there, super odds are going to recover your Sableye over and over again. If your Giratina does get knocked out, the play here is to go in and Iono, then super odd that Giratina back because you will need it for later on in the game. You also need that to recover some energies that may have been discarded with your Radiant Greninja early on to just draw deeper into the deck, and that way you can Mirage Gate them back. The strategy that I go with is that I do 1 grass first or 1 psychic, and then the opposite the second time around, so at least you have a mix of energy cards in your discard pile that you can super rod back in and then use for later on in the game. Now, if we're looking at the energy line here, energy line is exactly the same from the deck list that I had played earlier on, and that list did just fine. So Zach kept the exact same energy count here. Nothing had changed. What we do see changed in this list now is that we're playing the 2 Pokégears. Now that, again, is Zach's element of consistency. Just trying to find the Colresses pretty early on. And I have said it that you don't really even need Colress if you're playing this deck right, but Colress does help. Let's not beat a dead horse here. Colress is really the bread and butter of how the deck works, but if you're playing smart, you can Comfey and then go into Abyss Seeking. I've said it before and made the pun, it's as easy as AB Seeking, is you just put a Giratina in active with an energy card on it, and then you get to look at 4 cards, so it's a mini Colress every turn. You don't always need that Colress, but it is a nice extra boost to get deeper into the deck, maybe to reach that 7 number for your Mirage Gate, or your 10 for your V-Star attack, or your Sableye. So either way is really good, but the gears here really just turned it up a notch, so you're able to find either your disruption pieces, your boss, or your Colress at any turn of the game, and holding on to those was pretty key for Zach, I think. So having the 2 gears really sold the list a little bit more for Zach than it had for me, and I honestly was a non-believer of the gears. I didn't think that you need a gear in the deck. I still don't think that you need a second rope at least. Maybe 1 is fine. But the gears are really, really good. The more and more I play with gears, the more I do like having that. And you'll see that in this next list here. All right, and here is what we've landed on so far in our testing group. And this is honestly tested the best. This is what you came here for, folks. This is the list that I have been running myself. I came in second at an online tournament with about 62 players. And I really feel like this is a deck in contention to not only sweep Worlds, but maybe even win the World Championships in 2023 here. So this list is a little bit different, and we're going to go over those changes. We have still the same line for Comfey, Giratina, Sableye, your Cram, your Greninja, your Manaphy, but now we've added in Snorlax. Snorlax has been so good. The reason why we want to use Snorlax here is because it does have 150 hit points, which puts it in a great position towards those Lost Box decks trying to hit into you. They can't sprinkle Sableye damage onto Snorlax, and Snorlax also hits for a magic number of 180 damage. Now, what can you hit for 180 damage? You can take out Squawkabillies, and you can take out Luminions. So there's 2 prizes in the bag with this Pokemon, but what you can also do is add that damage up. If you hit into an Arceus with a Cramorant. That's 110 damage. Now you're adding 180 damage to it with a Snorlax, still leaving a single prizer in the active. Instead of hitting with a Giratina V or a Giratina V-Star, you're just trading favorably with your opponent who's maybe playing a 2-prize Pokemon. Now this can also hold true in the Chien-Pao matchups. This can hold true in a Gardevoir matchup where you're able to hit something with 180 damage like a Zacian V. If you hit it with 180 damage, they're not putting a whole lot of damage counters on that with a Psychic Embrace, are they? They're just letting it sit there and rot in the active spot. So you can take a 2-prize knockout there, which is really great because this list still holds true to the 2 boss. Now, we did cut down the supporter line here. We went to 1 Iono and 1 Roxanne, where this list doesn't really find a problem in the early games for trying to disrupt your opponent with the second Iono. We did opt to go right back down to the 1-1 line. So having the 1 of Iono mid game and then having the 1 of Roxanne late game was absolutely fine. And we never really needed that second Iono. There has been some points where maybe we thought about cutting a Pokégear to add in that second Iono, but really 2 gears is where we stuck on the list itself. Now, if we're looking at the other search counts here, we still have the 4 Battle VIP passes and the 4 of Nest Balls, and that's perfectly fine. I think that that's where we need to be. There is a case maybe we want that other extra 8th search, but I haven't needed it so far in the games that I've played personally. We stuck to 5 switching cards. Now, this is really where I was on the fence. Do we add that 6th switching card, or do we find something else to play in the deck? Really, with the 5 switching cards, it's been perfectly fine because really what sells me on this list, there are no water energies in the entire list, and you're going, what were they thinking? What were they cooking up here? No water energies in a Giratina list. And I would tell you this, that if you look at some of the past Gudra V-Star lists, they got rid of the psychic energy in there for the Sableye. If you look at any other list, the more consistency, the better, right? If you look at all of Tord Redcliffe's list, it's more consistency, the better. Any pro out there, you're going to find that true. Now here, we see there are 5 psychic energies, so it's even easier to draw into 5. Now, we're thinking, okay, we're going to use Greninja's ability, get that into the discard pile, draw more cards, and we're going to be able to siphon through our deck a little bit faster with the extra basic energy. Then we look at the grass energy. We're not so scared anymore because there's 4 grass energies in here. So really just ramping up your Giratina. You're able to get energies onto your Snorlax a little bit easier with Mirage Gate because there's more basic energies in the deck that you can use for alternatives. So now we're going to take a look at the jet energy count. There's 4 jet energies in this deck, and this is really what sells me on consistency because that's not only an extra energy in the deck, but it's also an extra switching out in the deck. So now instead of having that switch item in the deck that I wanted as the 6th card, we have the 4 jet energies. I tell you what, this deck has worked flawlessly for me. The only time that I really stumbled is playing against Palkia and not getting my paths to stick. Aside from that, this deck is absolutely amazing. So I know that the list is up here on the screen. You can take a screenshot of it and try it yourself, maybe at locals, but I will post it down in the description of this video as well on where we finalize the list. Again, I think that this is in contention for not only winning Worlds, but also being a great deck to play at Cups and Challenges, even without the Spiritomb in the deck for those Mew decks, or possibly even the Lugia deck. So if you like the list here or have any comments on it, definitely leave them in the comments below. We love checking those and responding to you, and I really hope that this deck shows you some success, and that's why we're posting it on the channel here, because we've also found internal team success, and we are a community-driven team, so we want to help out the community. Maybe this gives you a different way on how you can play Giratina V-Star yourself and learn to love the deck just like we do here. So I'm going to hop off this video here. You've heard enough from me and how we turned this list around and why we made some of the changes that we did. And again, I hope that you check out the rest of the videos on this channel. We're going to send it off from here.
You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.